All right, welcome everyone to the deep dive. Today we're going to be diving into something that really seems like a pretty significant moment in AI,
Oh, yeah.
the rise of the Model Context Protocol,
MCP.
MCP, yeah. And Robert Mao, he's the CEO over at ArcBlock, and he's been drawing some pretty interesting parallels. I mean, he's even saying that this is kind of like the early internet days or maybe even the launch of the iPhone. Um, Pretty strong statement, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. Definitely caught our attention. When someone like Robert, with all his experience in tech, makes a comparison like that, well, it definitely makes you think we might be seeing a foundational shift here. And for our listeners, understanding these really core changes, I mean, that's important for navigating the world of AI. It keeps changing and not get lost in all the noise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just so much information out there, and this is one of those things that I think a lot of people are seeing. They're hearing these huge claims, but they're not really sure what it means for them. So our mission today in this deep dive is to really try to unpack MCP.
Yeah.
What is it? Why is it generating all this buzz? And how do experts like Robert Mao and his team over at ArcBlock, how do they see this playing out in the future?
We're going to be drawing from a recent article that really goes into a lot of depth on MCP and also from a recent interview that we had with Robert himself.
Excellent.
And ArcBlock, they've been really proactive in integrating AI into their platform and their work. So Robert's perspective, I think, is especially valuable here.
Absolutely. Robert Mao leading ArcBlock, he's not just watching AI, from a distance. His company is actually building with it. They're in it,
Yeah.
and they adopted MCP early on and they integrated it really deeply. So their insights, I think, are really grounded in that real world experience, and that makes their understanding of its potential all the more relevant for our listeners.
Okay, so let's get right down to it. What is the fundamental problem that MCP is designed to solve? From what I understand, it's about kind of breaking down some of the walls that exist in AI right now. That's exactly right. Before MCP, there was a big hurdle for AI models, especially for smaller teams and startups.
Yeah.
It was this whole fragmented landscape of proprietary tool sets.
Oh, I see. So, if you wanted to use a particular AI, you were kind of locked into using their tools and their systems.
Yeah, often each of those major AI models, they operated in their own little walled garden. They had their own specific ways of connecting to external tools and data, and this made real collaboration and interoperability, I mean, it was a real challenge.
So it's almost like you're trying to build with tools from completely different manufacturers.
Right, exactly.
They just don't fit together.
Right, it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Okay.
And that's where Robert Mao's comparison to HTTP, I think, really makes it click.
Okay.
So just like HTTP provided that universal language for web browsers and servers to talk to each other, communicate seamlessly, MCP wants to do the same thing for AI. It wants to be that unifying standard that lets AI models connect with any number of external tools. So think about it. Any AI, any tool, instant connection. I mean, that's pretty powerful. That's the core of what makes MCP so disruptive.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And this is what Robert Mao was talking about when he said that it levels the playing field, right?
Right.
And he also said, it's like that iPhone moment. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us? What does that mean?
Sure. Think about the early days of mobile phones. Each brand, they had their own operating system. They had their own app stores,
Yeah.
And then, boom, the iPhone arrives.
Right.
And then later, you have Android. And they introduced a much more standardized platform. And this meant that developers, they could create apps that could reach a much larger audience.
Right.
That's what MCP wants to do for AI. It wants to standardize how AI models can access tools, and this could empower even small AI development teams, individuals even, to build really powerful applications. And they can leverage all these specialized tools that are out there without having to build everything from scratch.
Yeah.
They're not locked into that ecosystem of a single dominant provider anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So instead of this competition, this race to see who can build the most comprehensive toolkit, MCP is really promoting a much more collaborative space.
Right.
It's more like our sources call it a global AI tool network.
Right, exactly. It's a network of tools.
How is that actually playing out, though? How is this actually happening?
Well, what's really interesting is the fundamental shift in how AI development can happen. Instead of each AI company investing tons of money and time into building and maintaining their own complete set of tools, MCP encourages, specialization. So different companies can focus on developing best-in-class tools in their specific area of expertise.
Yeah.
And then all these specialized tools, they become available to a wide range of AI models because everyone's speaking the same language,
Yeah.
the MCP standard. So it's about moving from that competitive siloed environment to a more collaborative and interconnected one.
Yeah, and ArcBlock has really bought you to this.
Yeah, they have.
They're integrating MCP right at the core of their platform, right?
Absolutely. ArcBlock, they're built around these modular components that they call blocklets.
Right.
And by deeply embedding MCP, every single blocklet on their platform, it can be both a provider of tools in this growing global network and a consumer of other MCP-compatible tools.
Okay, so a blocklet could be both providing tools to other AIs and also using tools from other AIs.
Exactly. So, for example, let's say you have a blocklet that offers, I don't know, really advanced natural language processing. Well, it can make that capability available to any AI model out there that speaks MCP, right? And at the same time, that same blocklet, it can use other MCP tools for its own internal operations. I mean, it's almost like MCP is turning individual AI components into Lego bricks for a global intelligence network.
That's a really cool way to put it.
It's pretty powerful. It creates this synergy, and it accelerates innovation because developers can easily combine functionalities from all these different sources.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, this whole vision of seamless interaction, it's definitely compelling, but our sources also point out that the initial framework for MCP had some limitations, particularly around security and identity. How are those being addressed? Because that seems like a pretty big deal.
It is a really important point. MCP provided this essential, like plumbing for AI models to connect with tools.
Mm-hmm.
But initially, it was missing some of those robust mechanisms that you need to really guarantee the security and trustworthiness of all these interactions.
Yeah, like how do you know that, if one AI is interacting with another, how do you know that it's actually who it says it is?
Exactly. It's like, who is this AI agent? Are they actually allowed to use this tool? And what about payment?
Right.
How do we secure transactions if payment is involved?
Yeah.
Those were critical pieces that were missing initially.
And it looks like ArcBlock has really stepped up to provide those missing pieces, specifically through, the integration of DIDs, decentralized identifiers, and they're also using blockchain for secure payments. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Sure. It's really interesting how ArcBlock recognized this need, and they went ahead and proactively addressed it. They're using DIDs, which are like, digital IDs, but they're self-sovereign, meaning they're not controlled by any single entity.
Mm-hmm.
So this gives AI agents a way to prove who they are. It enables much stronger authentication and authorization when they're interacting with tools.
Mm.
Imagine an AI that needs to prove that it's, let's say, a legitimate weather forecasting agent before it can access really sensitive data. The DID acts like it's ID card, but it's an ID card that it issued to itself, not one given by a company.
Right. So there's no central authority that's like vouching for these AIs. They're vouching for themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then by using blockchain, they're creating this really secure and transparent way for AI agents to actually do business with each other, to pay for services automatically, like Robert Mao talked about. So let's say an AI needs to pay a data provider to get some data. Well, blockchain makes that happen. The payment goes through automatically. It's recorded securely. No humans involved. No bank accounts needed.
Wow. So we're not just talking about AIs using tools, but also paying for the tools and managing all those interactions on their own.
That's exactly right. And I think when you connect it to the bigger picture, it suggests a future where AI agents can be much more autonomous, much more efficient, and they can operate within this framework of trust.
Yeah, that's a really interesting future. Our sources also talk about how scalable and flexible MCP is.
Yeah.
It's not just for huge, cloud deployments.
No.
It can even work on just a single device.
Right.
Why is that so important that it can be used in so many different ways?
Well, the real beauty of MCP's design is that it's lightweight.
Okay.
It doesn't need a ton of computing power, which means you can implement it in lots of different environments, from, a simple app on your laptop to a huge distributed system. And because ArcBlock has integrated it so deeply, developers on their platform can build applications that can adapt and scale as their needs change. So you could be building an AI app that starts small, but maybe it has the potential to grow really big. Well, MCP gives you that scalability. It's like building a house with a foundation that's strong enough to add more floors later on.
That's a great analogy. And on top of that, there's this whole idea of combining MCP with blockchain to improve privacy. And that's something that ArcBlock is really passionate about.
Yeah.
How does that work? How does that combination improve privacy?
Well, this is where the synergy between MCP and blockchain really shines, especially now that data privacy is so important to all of us.
Right.
So ArcBlock uses blockchain to create a record of all the transactions and interactions happening through MCP. And this record, it can't be tampered with, and is completely transparent.
Got it.
Robert Mao, he really emphasized how this approach can actually empower users.
Okay.
Because it protects their data from those big tech companies. By decentralizing all that data and the transactions that go along with AI interactions, users have more control. They can see what's happening with their information. And it's about shifting towards a model where users are at the center of data privacy, especially in this age where AI is becoming more and more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I think a lot of people are worried about. As AI becomes more powerful, what does that mean for our privacy?
Yeah.
So it's not just about connecting these tools, it's about making sure those connections are secure and they respect people's privacy.
Exactly.
Now, one of the things that I found really interesting in our research was this potential for democratizing AI development.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Making it so that you don't have to be, a supercoder to build with AI. How does MCP help with that?
Well, MCP plays a really big role here by taking all the complex technical details of how these AI models communicate and interact with tools, and it hides them away.
Okay.
Robert Mao makes a great comparison with 5G. You use 5G on your phone all the time, but you don't need to know all the complex protocols that are making it work.
Right.
That's what MCP wants to do for AI tools.
Yeah.
It wants to make it just as seamless.
Okay, and this is where ArcBlock's AG&A engine comes in, right?
Exactly.
They're using MCP and DIDs to make it so that you don't need to code to build AI applications.
Precisely. They're designing AG&E as a platform where anyone can create sophisticated AI-powered apps without writing a single line of code. And they're doing this by building on the foundation of MCP for tool interaction and DDs for verification.
Okay.
So AG&E can offer this really user-friendly interface, and all that technical complexity is handled behind the scenes. This could be huge because it empowers people with all sorts of expertise who maybe aren't coders to build really powerful AI solutions.
Yeah, it really sounds like ArcBlock is all in on MCP.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
not just waiting to see what happens. They were early adopters. They're really shaping how this technology develops. Our sources really point out how forward-thinking they were to embrace MCP so early on.
Absolutely. Robert Mao, he's really excited about how MCP is solving a real problem, and there's just so much buzz around it right now. That speaks volumes about how forward-thinking ArcBlock has been. They didn't just adopt it, they integrated it at a really deep level, and that's because they understand how transformative it could be for the whole world of AI.
Yeah.
So they're positioning themselves as real leaders in this space.
And to really understand why MCP is so fundamental, I think Robert Mao's analogy of AI as a brain that needs tools is just so powerful.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
Can you just kind of go into that a little bit more and explain why that's such a good way to think about it?
Well, this analogy really gets to the heart of why MCP matters. AI, it can have incredibly sophisticated algorithms.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it can't really do anything in the real world if it can't connect with tools and data outside of itself. It's like having a brilliant mind, but you can't see, you can't touch, you can't interact with anything.
Right.
MCP gives that AI brain the hands and the eyes it needs to do things in the real world, to gather information, to perform tasks. And without this standardized way to connect, each AI is isolated. It's stuck with its own limited capabilities.
Yeah, so MCP is really like the nervous system, connecting that brain to the rest of the body, letting it interact with the world.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And our sources also brought up this concern about the potential for, a few big companies dominating AI.
Yeah, that was a big concern that came up.
Yeah, there's this worry that a handful of major players could create these proprietary tool ecosystems that only their AI models could easily access. And that would be a big problem for smaller companies.
Right. It stifles innovation if only the big guys can play.
Exactly. MCP addresses that directly. It provides this open, standardized way for AI models to use all sorts of tools no matter who made them. And that prevents the AI landscape from becoming too centralized.
Right.
It helps to keep things fair so innovation can flourish everywhere.
Yeah, it's like preventing a monopoly on AI tools.
Exactly. And for ArcBlock specifically, I think their decision to deeply integrate MCP alongside DIDs Well, that was a really strategic move.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They're making sure that every blocklet in their ecosystem can both offer its own functionalities as a server, meaning it provides tools, and acts as a client, meaning it can use tools from anywhere else in the MCP network. So any blocklet that you build could end up being a valuable service for tons of AI agents all over the world.
It's like turning each blocklet into a mini marketplace for AI tools.
That's a great way to think about it. And, MCP, while it's a fantastic foundation, it did have some limitations in its early stages,
Mm.
especially around things like identity, security, payments. And ArcBlock is actively working on extending MCP's capabilities in those crucial areas.
Right. It seems like they really saw those limitations and decided to take the lead in addressing them.
Absolutely. I mean, the initial MCP protocol, it was designed to be really focused.
Okay.
Just enabling communication between AIs and tools. But the early internet protocols, like HTTP, it was missing some of those built-in mechanisms for really secure and trustworthy interactions. So things like robust identity verification, authorization, secure payments, comprehensive security measures. Those weren't there initially.
Okay.
But ArcBlock, they recognize that,
Yeah.
and they're fixing it. They're integrating things like DIDs for verifiable identities. They're using verifiable credentials to make sure data exchange is secure, and they're implementing blockchain-based payment systems. So they're basically layering these essential security and trust mechanisms on top of the basic MCP protocol.
Oh, that's really interesting. So you mentioned DIDs earlier, and I think it's worth clarifying for our listeners. What's the difference between DIDs and something like OAuth? A lot of people have probably heard of OAuth.
Yeah, that's a good question. So OAuth, it's a standard that's used everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is it lets you give third-party applications access to your stuff without having to give them your password. So think about like a photo editing app that wants to access your photos that are stored in the cloud.
Right.
Well, with OAuth, you don't have to give that app your cloud password.
Right.
You can just grant them limited access.
Okay.
DDIs, though, are different. They're more about this idea of self-sovereign identity. It means you control your own identity.
Oh.
No one else does.
Got it.
So a DID, it's a decentralized identifier that's owned by whoever it represents, whether it's a person, a company, or even an AI agent. And it's not tied to any central authority.
Right. That makes sense. So it's not like Google or Facebook is saying, yes, this is this AI.
Exactly. And that's really important for AI agents because they need an identity that's verifiable and that's not dependent on some central company.
Makes sense. So both OAuth and DEEDs are useful, but they serve different purposes. DEDs are really crucial for AI agents because they need that independence.
Exactly.
They need to be able to say, this is who I am, without relying on someone else to say it for them.
Right. And all of this, even though it's really technical, it's ultimately about making AI smarter and easier for us to use.
Right. Right. We're the ones who are going to be using these AI apps. So how is ArcBlock approaching the user experience side of things? Because all this technology can get pretty complicated.
Yeah, that's a great point. Robert Mao says that users shouldn't need to understand how MCP works under the hood to benefit from the apps that it enables.
Okay.
It's like the internet. You use it every day, but you don't need to know all the technical details about how it works.
Right.
So ArcBlock is trying to make MCP just as seamless, especially with tools like AGN, their no-code platform. They want to abstract away all that complexity and make it really easy for people to interact with AI.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like by integrating MCP so deeply, ArcBlock is opening up a whole new world of possibilities for developers, not just for building traditional decentralized applications.
Oh yeah, for sure. They're enabling a whole new paradigm for their blocklets. Now these blocklets can be used not only by people through decentralized apps, but also by a much wider range of AI models and tools across the entire MCP ecosystem. So any component that's built on ArcBlock, it has this massive potential reach.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. A blocklet that you create could be a service that's used by countless AI agents all over the place. And Robert Mao also pointed out this really interesting relationship between AI and decentralized technologies.
Yeah.
He thinks that AI might actually drive wider adoption of decentralized solutions, which I thought was a really interesting point.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So his argument is that the things that AI needs to really advance, things like decentralized computing resources, strong data privacy, secure interactions between agents, all those things, they actually align really well with what decentralized technologies and blockchain can offer.
Right. So the needs of AI actually match the strengths of decentralized systems.
Exactly. AI needs an infrastructure that's resilient, it needs to be trustworthy, it needs to protect privacy, and decentralized platforms are really well suited to provide all of that.
That makes a lot of sense. So we could see a future where AI's need for these decentralized features becomes even bigger than the current use cases for things like blockchain and crypto.
That's exactly what Robert is suggesting. A lot of the early focus has been on AI needing crypto for payments.
Right.
But he's saying that the real potential is much bigger than that.
Okay.
It's about ensuring data privacy, making sure everything is traceable and verifiable. That's where blockchain could really shine in the world of AI. It's about building a future where AI operates in a transparent way and where everyone can trust it.
That's a really compelling vision. Our sources also touched on these challenges of hosting MCP servers. Securely hosting them in a traditional cloud environment with multiple tenants can be really difficult.
Yeah, it's a tricky problem.
How does ArcBlock's decentralized platform address that?
Well, in a typical centralized cloud environment, you have all these different users and organizations sharing the same resources.
Right.
And trying to keep everything secure and isolated, it's a big challenge. ArcBlock's approach is fundamentally different because it's decentralized. Users have more control over their own data and their own environments, and that reduces a lot of those security risks. So while the big cloud providers are definitely working on solutions for hosting MCP servers, ArcBlock's decentralized model offers a really compelling alternative that puts users in control and prioritizes data security.
Okay, so it's about finding a balance between ease of use, which is what the cloud providers are good at, and that enhanced security and control that comes with decentralization.
Exactly.
And finally, let's talk about the impact of MCP on decentralized applications.
Gaps.
dApps, yeah.
Yeah.
How does integrating MCP change things for dApp developers?
Well, I think this is one of the most exciting aspects. By making MCP a core part of their platform, ArcBlock is essentially letting AI agents become active participants in building and using dApps. Yeah. So imagine AI agents that can find and use reusable components, those blocklets we talked about, all on their own.
Right.
They could build and improve dApps in a much more efficient and dynamic way. This could lead to faster development, more powerful apps, and maybe even a whole new era of collaboration where human developers and AI agents are working together seamlessly.
That's a really interesting future. And Robert Mao, he seems incredibly optimistic about all of this.
Yeah, he is.
He really emphasized how foundational the changes are that ArcBlock is making with MCP.
Yeah, his enthusiasm is definitely contagious, and it's understandable when you see the scope of the work they're doing. They're laying the groundwork for a future where AI is just woven into the fabric of dApps. And the possibilities there, they're really exciting.
Absolutely. So to wrap up this deep dive into MCP, I think it's clear that this is a game changer. It's driving collaboration and innovation in AI, and experts like Robert Mao and the team at ArcBlock, they're not just watching from the sidelines.
Oh, no.
They're actively shaping how it evolves by bringing in things like security, identity, and the power of blockchain.
Absolutely. And for you, our listeners, you now have a much better understanding of this technology and the vision of a real leader in the field, so you can look beyond the headlines and understand what's really happening in AI.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. AI is getting better and better at interacting and transacting on its own, and it's all powered by protocols like MCP and secured by things like decentralized identity and blockchain. How could this change not just technology, but our entire economy and our social interactions? I think it's a really fascinating question to think about.
Yeah, definitely food for thought. And this deep dive, it's just the beginning. There's so much more to explore in this space where AI, blockchain, and protocols like MCP all come together.
Thanks for joining us today, and until next time, keep exploring.